Carmen Martinez had been invisible for 5 years. 5 years serving Manhattan's richest people at Sky Heights restaurant on the 60th floor, watching their secrets unfold right in front of her like she wasn't even there. But tonight was different. Tonight, billionaire Alexander Sterling was about to propose to his girlfriend Isabella. Carmen saw the velvet box in his pocket. She saw the excitement in his eyes. She saw how much he loved this woman. But she also saw something he couldn't see. Isabella's phone hidden under the table. The explicit photos she was sending to someone saved as "my love." The messages planning to meet her lover tonight, right after accepting Alexander's proposal. Carmen's hands started trembling as she poured the wine. This man was about to kneel down in front of the entire restaurant. He was about to offer his heart to a woman who was betraying him at that exact moment. And Carmen had to make a choice. Stay invisible like she'd done for 5 years, or risk everything to tell him the truth. When Alexander knelt down, when he pulled out that diamond ring, when the entire restaurant burst into applause, Carmen leaned close to his ear and whispered 7 words that would destroy an engagement and create a love story nobody saw coming. Because sometimes, the person serving your table isn't just a waitress. Sometimes she's the one who saves your life. And sometimes the billionaire doesn't marry the model. He marries the woman who had the courage to tell him the truth. At the elegant Sky Heights restaurant on the 60th floor of Hudson Yards Tower in Manhattan, Carmen Martinez served her last table before her life changed forever. At 27 years old, she had perfected the art of invisibility. 5 years observing the secrets of the powerful, without ever interfering. But that November night, when she saw billionaire Alexander Sterling's fiancée sending intimate photos to another man while he was planning to propose, something broke in her heart. With trembling hands, she whispered in the ear of America's richest man a truth that would destroy an engagement and create a true love. By the next morning, she would find a gift that would completely rewrite her destiny. Carmen knew every shadow, every whisper, every furtive glance that circulated among the tables at Sky Heights. Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant had been her territory for 5 years, where she had learned that waiters were useful furniture, but invisible. That Tuesday night she was serving table number 1, always reserved for Alexander Sterling and his fiancée Isabella Morgan. The 35-year-old billionaire had arrived particularly animated, talking about projects that excited him, while a small velvet box peeked out from his jacket pocket. Carmen understood immediately. He was about to propose to Isabella. Isabella, however, wasn't paying attention to a single word. Her eyes were fixed on her phone screen hidden under the table. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, with the urgency of someone living a very intimate conversation. Curiosity mixed with a protective instinct she couldn't explain made Carmen slow her movements as she poured the wine. What she saw shocked her deeply. Isabella was sending explicit photos to someone saved as "my love." The messages were unmistakable. They were organizing a meeting for that same night after dinner. Carmen's stomach contracted. Alexander continued talking about his dreams, ignorant that the woman he was about to propose to was betraying him just inches away. Throughout the entire evening, she served mechanically, but her mind was in turmoil. Every smile Alexander directed at Isabella physically hurt her. The proposal came with dessert. Alexander knelt in front of the entire restaurant, took out a ring with a diamond that shone like a star, and spoke words of love that moved everyone present. Everyone except Isabella, who accepted with a forced smile while already writing a response to a newly arrived message. Applause echoed through the restaurant, but Carmen felt them as if they came from very far away. She saw Alexander radiant, ignorant that the woman who had just accepted marrying him was already planning to meet with her lover. As she served the coffee, she found herself next to Alexander, just as Isabella had moved away to go to the bathroom. His eyes shone with happiness when he looked at her. He whispered words of genuine joy that broke Carmen's heart. The words came out before she could stop them, whispered like a breath, while pretending to arrange the table. She told him to check who his girlfriend was chatting with on her phone. The confusion on Alexander's face quickly transformed into understanding when Carmen explained in a few words what she had witnessed. She saw the exact moment when his perfect life began to crumble. Isabella returned from the bathroom with that fake smile always stamped on her face. Alexander watched her approach, and Carmen knew he would never be able to see her with the same eyes again. The evening ended apparently normal, but Carmen knew she had changed the course of 2 lives. As she watched the couple walk away, Alexander silent and thoughtful, Isabella already checking her phone, she wondered if she had done the right thing. The answer would come the next day in a way she could never have imagined. Alexander couldn't sleep that night. He watched Isabella sleep beside him in the penthouse overlooking Central Park, her phone still clutched in her hand even during sleep. For the first time in 2 years, he really looked at the woman he thought he loved. At 5 a.m., he made a decision that would change everything. With the delicacy of someone handling explosives, he slid the phone from his girlfriend's hands. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. Months of messages with Derek Harris, a fashion photographer. Explicit photos, declarations of love, and plans for the future together. Even more shocking were the messages from the previous night. The date at a downtown hotel, consummated just hours after she had accepted his marriage proposal. Isabella wasn't only betraying him for months, but was also mocking him with her lover, calling him the perfect ATM, and planning to divorce after gaining access to part of his fortune. Alexander closed the phone with trembling hands. In 35 years of life, he had faced business crises and million-dollar losses, but nothing had hurt him as deeply as discovering the woman he loved considered him only a means to get rich. He took the $2 million ring from the nightstand. He observed it in the dawn light filtering through the large windows. Then he put it in his pocket. He left without making noise and headed toward the office. But first he had someone to thank. His investigators had compiled all the information about Carmen Martinez, 27 years old. She lived alone with her mother, who had Alzheimer's, in a modest apartment in Washington Heights. She had worked at the restaurant for 5 years. She had never had problems with the law. And most impressively, she had rejected 3 better job offers to not abandon her mother. She was exactly the opposite of Isabella. Someone who put family before success, loyalty before profit. Before going to see her, Alexander made 3 crucial calls. To his lawyer requesting charges for fraud, to his investigator asking for all evidence about Isabella, and finally to his private bank, ordering the preparation of a black card with a $5 million limit in Carmen Martinez's name. The time had come to demonstrate that in the world, there still existed people who knew how to recognize honesty and reward it as it deserved. Carmen woke up at 6 o'clock, like every morning for 5 years. The routine was always the same: prepare coffee, verify that her mother had taken her medicines, comb her hair and tell her about the day, even though the woman only recognized the daughter who cared for her occasionally. While preparing breakfast, Carmen rethought the previous night. Had she done the right thing by warning Alexander? Or had she only ruined the life of a man who might have been happier in ignorance? The doubt tormented her, mixed with worry about her job. The sound of the doorbell startled her. Who could it be at that hour? She looked through the peephole and her heart stopped. Alexander Sterling was at her landing, elegant even at 7 in the morning, with a bouquet of white flowers in one hand and a leather folder in the other. She opened the door with trembling hands, aware of her disheveled appearance. Flannel pajamas, messy hair, no makeup. Alexander looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was gratitude, but also a profound sadness. He asked to come in, and she accommodated him in the small living room, mortified by the modesty of the apartment. Alexander Sterling, accustomed to the most extravagant luxuries, found himself in a 400-square-foot studio with IKEA furniture. Alexander confirmed she was right about everything. He offered her the flowers and then the leather folder. Inside was a black credit card, different from any she had ever seen, with her name engraved in golden letters. Carmen's automatic rejection was interrupted by Alexander's explanation. During the night, he had discovered that Isabella was using him. The marriage was just a way to access his fortune with the divorce already planned. The card had a $5 million limit. It wasn't a gift, but an investment in her, in people like her. Alexander explained she had done what 99 out of 100 people would never have done. She had chosen truth, even knowing it could cost her her job. He illustrated his plans for that day. He would report Isabella for fraud, make all her betrayals public, destroy her career as she was about to destroy his life. But first he wanted to do something positive, reward honesty. The card would allow Carmen to give her mother the best possible care, stop working as a waitress if she wanted, resume studies, do what she had always dreamed of. When her mother called from the bedroom, Carmen went to attend her, leaving Alexander alone. Upon her return, she found him standing in front of the window, watching New York wake up. Carmen accepted, but with one condition. Part of that money would go to help other people in her situation. Single mothers, children caring for sick parents. Alexander looked at her with an expression Carmen had never seen before. Respect, admiration, and something that looked like hope. He told her she was the richest person he had ever met. The war between Alexander and Isabella exploded in the American tabloids like a devastating tornado. In 24 hours, the story of the betrayed billionaire and the unfaithful model became the country's most followed scandal. Alexander had planned everything with the precision of a general studying a battle. The morning after his visit to Carmen, he called a press conference at his company headquarters. Before 50 journalists and cameras from major networks, he presented all the evidence without filters. Proof of the betrayals, messages where Isabella boasted about manipulating him, the plan to marry him, and then divorce with $1 million settlement. He declared he wasn't doing it for revenge, but because the public had the right to know who really was the person who had built her career on the image of the perfect woman. Isabella tried to defend herself with tearful interviews, painting herself as a victim of a powerful and vengeful man. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the American public, which had always loved love stories, didn't forgive the cold-blooded planned betrayal. Within a week, Isabella lost all her advertising contracts. The fashion brands that courted her discarded her. Her agent abandoned her. Sponsors disappeared, and even Derek Harris, the photographer for whom she had risked everything, left her when he realized the story would end in the newspapers. Alexander wasn't satisfied with Isabella's social ruin. He also had her charged with fraud, manipulation, and blackmail. His lawyers, the best in America, built a case so solid the woman risked years in prison. Carmen followed the entire situation from the newspapers with conflicting feelings. On one hand, she was happy Alexander had discovered the truth. On the other, she felt responsible for the total destruction of a person. The black card in her wallet seemed like an enormous weight. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. But Alexander hadn't forgotten his promise. After resolving the Isabella matter, he dedicated himself completely to what he began calling the Carmen mission. Without saying anything to the young woman, he discreetly had the elevator in her building repaired, paid a year of rent in advance for all tenants with difficulties, and above all had all the medical equipment necessary for her mother installed in Carmen's apartment. Carmen realized when she returned home after her shift and found 2 private nurses caring for her mother. When she learned that an anonymous benefactor had paid for a year of complete assistance, including medicines and experimental therapies, Carmen immediately understood who it was. That same night, she went to Alexander's headquarters, overcoming security with determination that surprised everyone. Bursting into his office on the 60th floor, she protested about what he was doing. Alexander didn't seem surprised to see her. When she protested about the nurses, medicines, and improvements to the apartment, he responded that they weren't gifts, but investments in a person worth much more than it cost to keep her happy. Carmen felt herself trembling. There was something in Alexander's eyes she had never seen before. He was no longer the cold, calculating billionaire who had destroyed Isabella. He was a man who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Alexander stood up and approached the large windows overlooking Manhattan. The city shone at his feet, millions of lights pulsing in the night. He confessed to having spent his entire life surrounded by people who loved him for what he had, not for what he was. Carmen was the only person who had told him the truth, even when it could cost her everything. When Carmen objected that she was just a waitress living in a studio with nothing to offer him, Alexander turned with an expression that made her heart beat faster. He revealed he had understood in those days that he had fallen in love with a waitress who had the courage to save a billionaire from himself. The words hung suspended in the air between them. Carmen felt the world spin around her. Alexander approached, taking her hands in his. He recognized it was too soon, that it seemed impossible, but he asked for just one chance. He wanted to prove to her that not all rich men were like those she had always served in the restaurant, that she deserved all the love in the world. Carmen looked into his eyes and saw something that shocked her. Vulnerability. America's most powerful man was opening his heart to her like a boy in love. She whispered she would give him a chance, just one chance. Alexander smiled, and Carmen understood her life was about to change forever. The months that followed were the most extraordinary of Carmen's life. Alexander kept his word. He proved to her every day that she deserved all the love in the world. But respecting her times, her insecurities, her world so different from his, he didn't fill her with expensive gifts, nor drag her into Manhattan's jet set. Instead, he learned to know her daily life. He began meeting her at the coffee shop downstairs to have breakfast together before she went to work. He met her mother, and with infinite patience learned to communicate with a woman who lived increasingly in memories of the past. When Carmen introduced Alexander as a friend from work, her mother smiled sweetly, remembering her high school boyfriend who was named that, and brought her flowers every Friday. Alexander didn't correct the misunderstanding. On the contrary, the following Friday he showed up with a bouquet of daisies, Mrs. Martinez's favorite flowers. Carmen watched him as he talked with her mother, surprised by the gentleness with which he treated a woman who often didn't recognize him. Alexander Sterling, the man who managed multinational corporations, spent hours looking at old photo albums with an Alzheimer's patient, listening to the same stories repeated 100 times, never losing patience. But not everything was simple. Alexander's world didn't easily accept Carmen. His partners looked at her with suspicion. High society friends treated her with poorly disguised condescension, and gossip tabloids didn't miss an opportunity to emphasize the social difference between the billionaire and the waitress. Weekly magazine headlined about Carmen Martinez's modern fairy tale, publishing photos of her taken secretly as she left her building in Washington Heights. Carmen took it all with dignity, but Alexander saw how those attacks hurt her. One night, he found her on the balcony of the new apartment with a newspaper in hand and tears in her eyes. The headlines accused her of being a gold digger who had plotted everything to conquer him. Alexander took the newspaper and threw it in the trash, asking why she cared what they said. When Carmen expressed her fear that he too would begin to doubt, Alexander took her in his arms, feeling the fragility of this woman who had shown so much courage. He reminded her he had seen her risk her job to tell the truth to a stranger, sacrifice her dreams for her mother, cry over money she didn't have, and smile over life's small joys. How could he doubt her? But the biggest test came when Isabella, already ruined and desperate, made one last attempt at revenge. Through her contacts in journalism, she managed to publish an article accusing Carmen of having invented everything to conquer Alexander. The article defined her as a blackmailing waitress, accompanied by compromising photos of Carmen at work and interviews with colleagues who, paid generously, talked about a girl always interested in rich customers. The article caused a scandal. For the first time, Carmen found herself at the center of a media storm that threatened to destroy her. She lost her job at the restaurant, was chased by paparazzi every time she left home, and began receiving hate messages on social media. One night, after finding a group of journalists in front of her house wanting to interview her, Carmen suggested to Alexander that maybe they should take a break. She didn't want her presence to ruin his reputation. Alexander looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. There was fierce determination in his eyes. He declared that if she thought he would leave her because of an article written by a woman who had already destroyed once, it meant she didn't know him at all. The next day, Alexander called another press conference, but this time he didn't talk about business or scandals. He talked about love. He told how months ago a waitress had saved his life by telling him a truth no one else had the courage to tell him. Since then, Carmen Martinez demonstrated to him every day what it meant to truly love someone, not for what they have, but for what they are. He paused, looking directly at the cameras broadcasting live, declaring that Carmen was worth more than all those who wrote infamous articles about her combined, and then, looking straight at the camera, he asked her to marry him. The live televised proposal went around the world. Carmen watched it from the living room of her apartment, surrounded by her mother's nurses and a group of friends who had come to support her. When Alexander returned home that night, he found her waiting for him with the ring he had bought for Isabella in her hands. Carmen observed it was the same ring. Alexander confirmed, but explained it wasn't the same man offering it, and above all, it wasn't the same woman receiving it. Carmen looked into his eyes and saw their entire future together. She accepted to marry him. The kiss that followed tasted of tears, of battles won, and of a love that had overcome every test. Alexander and Carmen's wedding was celebrated a year later in a ceremony that became the symbol of a modern fairy tale. It wasn't the typical millionaire's wedding full of luxury and ostentation. It was a celebration of authentic love held in the garden of the house Alexander had bought for them in the Westchester countryside with views of the Hudson Valley. The guests were an extraordinary mix of different worlds. Alexander's colleagues from the tech sector sat next to Carmen's waitress friends. Finance magnates shared tables with the nurses who cared for the bride's mother. It was the image of an America that still knew how to recognize people's value beyond appearances. Carmen's mother, in one of her moments of lucidity, was accompanied down the aisle by Alexander himself. During the banquet, Alexander took the floor for a speech that went down in history, explaining how Carmen had taught him that true love is much simpler and much harder than in movies. It's having the courage to tell the truth, even when it hurts. The announcement that followed surprised all the guests. Alexander and Carmen were about to launch the Martinez Sterling Foundation, dedicated to free assistance for families with Alzheimer's patients and economic support for young people who gave up studies to care for their parents. Carmen was named president of the foundation with a salary that made her economically independent. Alexander declared he didn't want anyone to ever say his wife depended on him. Carmen Martinez was an extraordinary woman who deserved to shine with her own light. The party continued until dawn, but the most beautiful moment came when the newlyweds found themselves alone on the terrace overlooking the valley, watching the sun rise over the Hudson. 6 months after the wedding, Carmen discovered she was pregnant. The news came the same day her mother had an extraordinary moment of lucidity and recognized Alexander, calling him by name and thanking him for making her daughter happy. Those were the last lucid words she spoke before peacefully passing away in her sleep 3 days later, surrounded by the love of her daughter and the son-in-law she had learned to love like a son. The baby was born in spring, a boy they named Carlos, after the grandfather Carmen had never known. Alexander held him in his arms for the first time with tears in his eyes, thinking about the miracle this little life had brought to their existence. Carmen watched them from the hospital bed, thinking about the incredible journey that had taken her from being a heartbroken waitress to a happy mother and beloved wife. The night they returned from the hospital, Alexander found on the nightstand the black card he had given her that first day. Carmen had never used it. When he asked why, she smiled, pointing to the crib where their baby slept, explaining that he had already given her the greatest gift, the possibility to love and be loved. Everything else was just details. What had begun as the story of a waitress who saved a billionaire had become the story of two people who saved each other, building together a family based on the purest love that exists, that which asks for nothing in return and gives everything without reservations. And in Manhattan, at the headquarters of the Martinez Sterling Foundation, a golden plaque reminds everyone who enters of the principle that inspired everything. Honesty is the only luxury that cannot be bought, and the only treasure that cannot be stolen. If this story has moved you to tears, leave a like. Share in the comments. Do you believe honesty is still a value in today's world? Have you ever had the courage to tell a difficult truth? Subscribe and activate notifications for more stories that prove true love overcomes any social barrier.